Hi folks, welcome back. Today we're going to be wrapping up Critters number 4, Meet the Clades number 4, which is going to encompass plants and mollusks. This first installment of the 2 videos in this series will cover plants. To celebrate, I thought I would highlight my very favorite plant, Audrey True, from The Little Shop of Horrors, who sadly is not a real plant. So the tree of life, we've already talked about all of these domains, bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Bacteria and archaea being prokaryotic, and eukaryota being eukaryotic. But we've really only focused on animals, which is a tiny piece of the diversity on Earth. However, it's really the primary fossil record that we have to deal with. Today we're going to talk about plants and to a small extent fungus as well. But just remember there's a whole lot more life out there that we could talk about. So plants, they're pretty great. They make their own food, super duper helpful, right? Are they the reason we have oxygen? To a point, yes. All right, trees are still pretty important. But please remember here that algae is actually half of your oxygen, or the ability for you to breathe oxygen. So algae has been puffing away little bits of oxygen for approximately 2.7 billion years since the Great Oxygenation Event, and trees have only been around for about 350 million years of that. So even though we give them all the credit, please remember that algae deserves at least 46% of that credit. So plants moved to land before animals did. All right. Earliest evidence puts it at about the upper Ordovician to Silurian for the first microfossils to be found of plants on land. But by moving to land first, they changed land quite a bit to make it more tenable for animals. They became primary producers on land, giving food sources to animals, and their roots also bound together the terrestrial sediments, giving them soils, which did provide alternative environments for animals to move into. All right? So the study of plants is called paleobotany. The study of fossil spores is palynology, just so you know. Now there's 2 major groups of plants we're going to talk about today. The non-vascular plants and the vascular plants. Their nicknames, which aren't really monophyletic groups, are bryophytes and tracheophytes. I will refer to them as non-vascular and vascular plants. So non-vascular plants, things like moss, hornworts, liverworts, etc., they appear first. These are limited in their lifestyle because they have to have an aquatic carrier in the immediate vicinity in order to reproduce, and they have to use diffusion to move nutrients and waste in and out. This is because they don't have the specialized tissues that vascular plants do, like trees, which are xylem and phloem that allow nutrients and water to flow in and out. This also limits them in another specific way. Without these specialized tissues, they really don't have any protection or any, what's the word I'm looking for here? They really don't have any ability to fight gravity. We've talked about this a little bit, but gravity is super tough for animals to get over, and plants as well. In the water, gravity is not a big deal. On land, we have to find ways to strengthen our bodies against gravity. Trees do this with xylem and phloem, and later, lignin, which will make up wood. Non-vascular plants don't have that, so as a result, they really have to stay low to the ground. Now, what other challenges will plants have to face moving on land? I want you to pause the video for a second and just think about how difficult the move to land must have been for plants. So they had to overcome multiple new challenges, some of which being gas exchange. How are they going to continuously get gas exchange in and out of the organism without drying out? So some of the ways that they've done this, there's many different ways, is things like stomata. They're the pores in leaves and stems that allow carbon dioxide and water vapor and oxygen to pass in and out. Many have a waxy cuticle on those leaves to stop it from drying out or losing too much. Plants can add and reduce the number of stomata in their bodies depending on what's going on. And we can actually use this as a way to estimate paleoclimatic data, something you'll be doing in your in-class assignment. Roots are another excellent thing to help with uptake from nutrients in the soil, as well as ways to anchor them in against wind and other events such as that. Reproduction. If you're living in the water, if you're like a sponge, you can just close your eyes real tight. Sponges don't have eyes, never mind, and they can shoot off their gametes, their sex cells, and they can reproduce super easily. not going to work so well in land, where the wind is not always constant. So this is not the best scenario. So with non-vascular plants, we have spores, which are dependent on water sources and a number of other arenas. And then we have seeds, and we'll talk about those reproductive things later. And finally, like we talked about, gravity and support. So things like our xylem and phloem, the vascular tissues, but also lignin, which we'll see in plants and other trees and other woody plants. This is an example of what we consider the oldest vascular plant, Cooksonian, showing up in the mid-Silurian to early Devonian. Super cute little critter, all right? We think that it's Cooksonia because it has a little bit of the vascular tissues preserved in its system. This is considered a transitional fossil. It still has features of non-vascular, but it does have features of vascular plants as well. Now, to talk about the difference between seeds versus spores. First, spores are itty-bitty. They're tiny. Seeds are much larger. Here's an average size difference here. Spores are typically made up of a single cell, and they do not contain a nutrient supply. They need sperm to swim through the water to fertilize the egg. So this really limits the amount of areas that this can live in, and it really limits the amount of time that a spore can stay alive without being fertilized. Now, seeds, on the other hand, which come a little bit later, especially with vascular plants, they are able to have a nutrient supply contained right within the cell. They spread by wind, water, animals, a whole host of different ways, and it does not need water to fertilize the egg. And frankly, as long as that seed stays dry, it can stay alive but not planted for hundreds of years. There have literally been seeds that are thousands of years old, I believe, that have just been planted and are still good to go. I mean, everybody's parents pretty much have like one of those junk drawers, right, with like tons of seeds in them. They're still good to go after how many decades of being in there. It's wild, right? So here we have the phylogenetic ranges of our plants here. And here we can see with the tracheophytes, they really take off in the Devonian and continue to spread. And the reason for that, a lot of which is seeds. Seeds allow for a much broader distribution than spores ever did, which allows them to start taking over the land masses in a much more efficient way. So why would seeds drastically change plant biogeography? This is an image of one of the great red sequoia trees in California. Absolutely beautiful and magnificent. So one example of just this particular tree here, it can produce 1 to 10 billion seeds in a single tree's lifetime. And it really only needs one to reach adulthood to maintain a steady population. But because these can be spread by water and wind, and they can stay alive until planted, that greatly increases its chance that at least one will reach adulthood. Most won't. Most seeds will still not reach adulthood, but this greatly increases its chance. And many seeds have innovative spreading methods. So this is our friend the blackberry here, the humble blackberry. And even though it may look innocent, it has a devious way of making sure its seeds get spread. How this happens is the blackberry plant has seeds that are incredibly difficult to digest. So many animals, humans included, will get upset stomachs after eating too many blackberries. Birds specifically have a hard time saying no to these delicious treats. So these seeds cause an upset stomach, which causes the animal eating them to excrete those seeds in its waste. So for birds, this is a really helpful way to get them to spread things because birds fly and they can plant things in new areas. So if you've ever eaten wild blackberries, there's a high chance that the reason those blackberries are there is because a bird or other animal pooped those seeds out for you. So the more you know. So this is what early plants and early trees would have looked like. You'll notice there's no grass. Grass does not evolve for many, many hundreds of millions of years at this point, but we do have lots of ferns, lots of trees, lycopod trees. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Pay attention to this beautiful scale-like pattern here. This is a tree called Lepidodendron. Many folks think that it is a snake skin impression, but it is actually a tree. So the Carboniferous coal swamps. In the Carboniferous, plants take off. Lots and lots and lots of trees take off. That's where the word carboniferous comes from, all the extra carbon. We have trees that are massive, 150 feet tall. Again, the lepidodendron, like the ones I showed you, calamites, Ceronius, all tons of large plant biomass. And if we have all those extra trees, this should be something we see in the isotopic record, shouldn't it? With all those trees, they are taking in carbon, they are breaking down the carbon-12, and they are removing the carbon-13 in their bio-waste, which indicates this right here, because all that bio-waste is getting buried into the rock record, seeing that massive spike. You'll remember this because we talked about this in the last Meet the Critters lecture, with insects getting to be massive. So, you know, gigantic dragonflies right here, all thanks to the trees. So here is an example of one of these fossil forests. This is a fossil that you're looking at. How wild is this? This is in Glasgow, Scotland. This is the lepidodendron forest. I would do just about anything to go visit here. Here's another example of the lepidodendron. This is not the lepidodendron forest in Scotland. This is actually in Tennessee. And here's an unsuspecting bystander taking a photo. So these Carboniferous coal swamps really formed all over the Carboniferous. It was very cool, lots of beautiful trees, lots of biomass. Essentially, it looked a lot like Florida. Lots of trees were growing on top of dead trees, which were growing on top of dead trees. And all of those trees were getting buried slowly and heated and turning into coal. This is where most of our coal comes from. However, as Pangea forms, so imagine Pangea forming with me, a lot of these coal swamps ended, and the reason for that is most deserts form in the middle of continents. So if we take all of our continents and form them into one gigantic continent, we're going to have a whole lot more aridity, more desert formation. So those will end the coal swamps eventually and promote a large rise in temperature, right? So we will see a quick crash in our carbon-13. Do we see that? Ooh, we absolutely do. Look at that. All right, just at Pangea coming together. All right, so picking back up here with the Gymnosperms. Gymnosperms, the seed plants, arise in the late Devonian. However, they become dominant after the Carboniferous. They are seed plants, which makes them a lot easier, to establish themselves in harsher conditions like droughts and other things. Today, we mostly recognize them as conifers like pine needles and other things, and these are really good at retaining water, avoiding freezing in the cold winters, and they're actually really fireproof. Angiosperms arise. Now, for a long time, we thought the angiosperms showed up in the Cenozoic, at the base of the Cenozoic. We then moved it to the base of the Cretaceous. Now we know that they actually arose in the Triassic, both from molecular phylogenetic data and fossil data as well. These are the most successful modern group of plants with over 260,000 species. They're major synapomorphic or flowers. Some have petals. Some of these petals and speciations may have been symbiotic relationships with insects, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Grasses will later evolve in the Cretaceous, and they will cover approximately 40% of land surface, which is really cool. So here we have a bee covered with angiosperm pumpkin pollen. How adorable, right? And some flowers actually mimic insects to get them to attract pollination. The amount of speciation in modern flowers is absolutely ridiculous. There's all kinds of different varieties and adaptive radiations going on. There are certain flowers that can only be pollinated by certain bugs, but here are two of my favorites, the fly orchid and the bee orchid, that have flowers that look just like the bugs. So again, spores and pollen are microfossils, and they are organic wild reproductive tissues. They are super resistant to damage. They are tiny. They are preserved in extremely high numbers, as those of us who have ever suffered through Florida allergy season know. And we can usually extract them from rock with hydrofluoric acid, which means that we can collect a lot of these wholesale without damaging the fossils, which allows us to reconstruct fossil trends of what plants were around at the time, temperatures, and more.